Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
Hello, and you're most welcome to this, the final episode of the Business of Winning podcast of 2025. At the time of recording, we're just 6 days to go until Christmas, 12 days until we celebrate the start of New Year, and 77 days until the 11 Formula One teams hit the track to commence practice for the opening round of the 2026 Formula One World Championship in Melbourne, Australia. In the meantime, the dust has settled on F1 2025. I'm sure, like me, you've been seeing all the award ceremonies, the end of season celebrations amongst Formula One's teams. We've also been saying goodbye to the Sauber name in Formula One ahead of Audi's much awaited arrival alongside Cadillac, of course. And also saying farewell to the men and women at Renault's F1 engine facility in Viry-Châtillon, just outside Paris. And bringing to an end almost 50 years of pioneering excellence in Formula One engine technology. Just in case you need a reminder, that included powering 12 teams to success in the World Championship for Constructors, including most recently Red Bull Racing's run of success between 2010 and 2013. Of course, Renault also powered 11 drivers' titles, including those with such luminaries as Nigel Mansell, Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher. I think a lot of people forget Michael Schumacher won his first two World Championships powered by Ford and Renault. Damon Hill, of course, and Jacques Villeneuve at Williams. Fernando Alonso at Renault. And, of course, Sebastian Vettel with that run of success at Red Bull. Not a bad lineup, and too bad someone in the upper echelons at Renault decided there was no further value to be had from being a player rather than a passenger in Formula One's powertrain landscape. Anyway, on to this episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to have Martin Donnelly with us today. Now, as you will hear, Martin and I have known each other for a long time. Those of you unfamiliar with his story, you'll get to hear about his journey from being a young lad in Belfast in Northern Ireland to reach the heady heights of Formula One, only for fate to intervene, a horrific accident at the 1990 Spanish Grand Prix, bringing his realistic hopes of one day winning the Formula One World Championship to a crushing end. Now, that accident, of course, was used by the producers of this year's blockbuster F1 movie to provide the backstory to Brad Pitt's character, Sonny Hayes. And I think that story really brought Martin to the attention of a whole new generation of fans around the world. His life has been shaped by a more visceral, violent era of Formula One, one which seems almost impossible to imagine in the F1 of today. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Martin, great to have you on the Business of Winning podcast. Real pleasure to have you here. And it's been a big year for you, hasn't it, 2025?
Well, likewise, Mark. I just want, first of all, to start off by thanking you for having me on your podcast today. Yeah, and 2025 has opened up new corridors and new avenues for future things for next year.
So we're going to get into your involvement in F1 the movie. More than an involvement, the backstory to Sonny Hayes, the character played by Brad Pitt, is absolutely based on something that happened to you, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But let me take us all the way back to when we met. We met as teenagers, our mothers were friends in Belfast in Northern Ireland. They both were members of her operatic society. And I then remember meeting you actually through my brother, who was a pal of Joey Greenan, who was an absolutely top quality racing and rally driver in Belfast, and his car was sponsored by your father's company, and I met your father, Martin Donnelly Sr. So where did your father get the bug for motorsport from?
Well, ironically, where we lived, behind it was a small hill, and the far side of that hill, only about a 20-minute drive, was a place called Dundrod. And Dundrod back in the day in the 50s and 60s used to host the Ulster TT, and he decided one day to go up and have a look and see what all the noise was about, because you hear from the house. He parked up a couple of fields back from the hairpin, walked across the hairpin and watched the likes of Fangio, Sterling Moss, his hero, a guy called Mike Hawthorne, come round this hairpin, these gleaming, beautiful cars, very noisy, straight through exhaust on them back in the days. And that just somehow resonated with him, and he fancied his chances, to be honest. Even though he was just a potato merchant back in the day, he didn't realise how expensive motor racing was. And let's move on to later in life. He, in 1977, bought a Crossy 16F from a Ford car.
So I met you the following year. You were by then 14 years of age. I was 16. And I know that you were getting sneaky little test drives in that Crosley at a young age. And it became pretty evident that you were handy behind the wheel. And Formula Ford in Ireland then progressed through to moving to England and getting into Formula 3. And I want to talk about the second, I suppose, most important person in your career, which is that you attracted the attention of Frank Nolan.
He wanted to take some young lad to England. Obviously, I won the Irishman Ford Festival that year. Was for driver of the year both north and south of the border. So I was going places, but only in Ireland. I mean, you can win the Irish Championship 5 years in a row, which doesn't mean anything to over in the mainland. You had to be in the mainland to take on the works teams, the quickest drivers. I mean, Senna came from Brazil, Mark Webber came from Australia, Eddie Irvine came from Ulster. You know, you had to be in the mainland to progress in motorsport. And Frank rang me one afternoon and said, Martin, he says, I want to take some young lad across the English Isles and go motor racing. And I said, Frank, I've just started at Queen's University in Belfast. But he said, well, it's not, if you can't leave the uni, he says, I'll still sponsor you in Ireland, but I will take some young lad to the UK. So I spoke to my parents, spoke to my mother, and she was very against it. Took her down to see my the dean of the university. He said, look, great opportunity for you, Martin. I don't fully understand your situation. I understand your situation, Morgan. He said, what we'll do is keep the place open for a year. And if it doesn't work out in the UK, Martin can come back and pick up where he left off. And if it does work out, then well and good. And just let's say, I never worked my way back to Queen's University. I just rode the wave through FF2000 into F3 and beyond into F1 over a course of about 7 years.
I suspect Queen's University are still holding a place for you if you want to go back, Martin.
I don't know. I often pass when it's back home. I often pass. I think I always think, what could have been? What could have happened? Because when I had my accident, I had no qualifications to fall back on. Motorsport and the experience I had was what I had. So if anybody's listening today, I always say, get your education done first, boys. Get a degree or something behind you to fall back on, because the rocky road into F1, they all looks very glamorous, but they don't highlight the pitfalls that can happen in the early years and getting moving forward. It's very political.
And there you go, listeners, especially young listeners. Very good advice from a man who knows from experience. Now, Formula 3 in England, I think you were with Swallow, I think, to begin with. And then you went to Intersport with Glenn Waters and sponsored by Cellnet. You were teammate to a certain Damon Hill.
Where is he now?
Where is he now? We'll come on to that again in a moment, because, all joking aside, your career was becoming meteoric. And then when Thomas Danielson got dropped by Eddie Jordan Racing, you found yourself moved into Formula 3000, the category just below Formula 1 back in the day, and indeed won your very first Formula 3000 race for Eddie at Brands Hatch. And all of a sudden, Martin, you went from national racing in Formula 3, albeit you have, of course, had won the Macau Grand Prix, you'd become the FIA Formula 3 world champion. But now in Formula 3000, you're really on the cusp of Formula 1.
Long story short, 5 races, 2 wins, 2 seconds, a pole position and a DNF. And I went the last race at, I think it was Dijon, with a mathematical chance of actually winning the championship. So that brought me onto the international stage big time. And EJ didn't want to lose me, or he realised he found something a bit special. Didn't ask for the money anymore, but became my pimp and started sending me out to Japan to race for a team called Caithness RNG. He didn't care about the results. Just as long as I came back to check the team to give to him, he was happy enough. And that's where things progressed with my life with Eddie Jordan Racing.
So you raced in an international Formula 3000 the following season. We're talking 1990 now, 1989, sorry. And it was during that year that you got your opportunity to make your debut in Formula One. And I was talking to someone recently, and they'd forgotten the fact that you made your debut not for Team Lotus, which we'll talk about in a moment, but for the Arrows team. How did that come about? And just talk us through that weekend at Paul Ricard.
It came about because Derek Warwick was doing a hill climb over in Jersey, but he was using a go-kart. He was using a car, using a go-kart. Whatever happened, he lost control and overshot a corner, I think, and hit the front of a transit van that was parked there. And obviously, quite a bit of damage to his back and maybe a few ribs. And all of a sudden, they were looking at a driver for Paul Ricard. And just before then, there was the 4-day test at Silverstone, which was called the Goodyear Tire Tests. And Lewis went there with 3 cars, one for PK, which had a Tickford 5.5 Yamaha engine. Then there was the second driver who brought money from Epsom and brought a wedge from Epsom as well. And there was me just up there to prop up and do some testing on development parts they brought as well. And each day we got to go on qualifying tires, which were like just something you couldn't explain. And then the last day I got into PK's car with qualifying fuel, qualifying tires, and I think I blitzed the time they see me doing all week. And I'd be teaching them how to pre-load the front springs, whereby back then we didn't have wind tunnels as such, nor did we have telemetry, but they believed that the stiffer you ran the chassis, the better the aerodynamics would be in the car. I mean, we had more suspension travel in the flex on the sidewall of the tire than we had in the actual damping. And every time we went out with this, with Mike Coughlin, I went quicker and quicker and quicker. And we put that onto Pickett's car. Pickett used that for qualifying at Silverstone, and he finished 4th in the race. But I got no thanks for that. But we're not mentioning that anymore. And that's where it brought me to the attention of both Peter Moore and Duncan Lee from Camel. But I was sponsored by Camel. The team was sponsored by Camel in '89 with EJ.
So the Team Lotus deal came together, and you mentioned Derek Warwick a few moments ago because you replaced him in that Arrows car for your debut at the French Grand Prix. You then found yourself alongside Derek the following year at Team Lotus. Just talk us through that experience, because Team Lotus, of course, had been absolutely one of the top teams in Formula One. It was now a team to some degree in decline, struggling a little bit, but they did have quite visible sponsorship from Camel. You mentioned Duncan Lee, and of course Camel had been involved with you in F3000. So talk to us about Team Lotus, how you found that experience in coming into your first full season of Formula One.
Well, Mark, for a team that was the top team with Colin Chapman, who was, I have described, the modern day Adrian Newey. He invented the ground effects cars. He invented the twin chassis to get the regulations and front wings and rear wings. He was a pioneer. And he had great drivers over the years. He had Mario Andretti, he had Nigel Mansell in his first year of F1. And that was a team to behold and to be with. And to be asked to drive for them in F1, you have to pinch yourself. But we didn't realize just how badly financially they were in decline. So much so they couldn't afford to build a new tub for myself and work. And we were about 5'10" each, whereas PK and Nakajima were about 5'6", 5'7". So we had to get into their tubs, which were very, very uncomfortable. For example, you have your foot in the throttle pedal and your knee was on the bulkhead, which is just underneath the steering wheel. And after about 10, 12 laps, your legs would go numb because you're actually having this thumping suspension going through your legs. And eventually they agreed to let me and myself and Derek come out of the car by about an inch and a half. Therefore, we were too high for the roll bar test. So they put a big cone on top of the top, which then go around that thing. But bear in mind, Senna had signed for Lotus a couple of years before that. And then Warwick had signed. Along then came Senna. And Senna wouldn't drive for Lotus if Warwick was in the team. He thought that he's too competitive and he wanted the tension more or less on himself. And they gave Senna what he wanted. So they let Warwick go too late in the season to get another F1 drive. Hence, then he went to drive for the Jaguar Group C team. So when I went into F1, yes, it was with Derek Warwick, but he had a reputation that Senna didn't want to go and face him. And there was I, a young lad, to go against this guy who had 10 years of F1 experience. And I knew that my gauge in F1 per se would have been judged by how I compared against Warwick. And that was no mean feat because he's number one driver. He had a qualifying car and an F1 a race car all set up. I only had my own car each time, and I think I did a good job. I'd say the majority of the qualifying sessions we were hundredths or tenths of a second apart. Sometimes I qualified him at his favourite circuits, i.e. Silverstone and Monaco. That didn't go unnoticed to Lotus. The morning of my accident in Jerez, I had 4 contracts on the table. Bear in mind, this is after only 12 Grand Prix from Arrows, Terrell, Jordan, and Lotus. Lotus had the option. They took up the option. We signed that 2.5 hours before qualifying, and they gave me a check for $40,000. That was the option fee, and I was signed to be number one driver for 91 and 92. So I was on a crest of a wave, free clothing from Hugo Boss, cars left, right, and centre, and all the attention was going to be myself. Life couldn't get much better.
Yeah. So we're talking about the 29th of September 1990. You've been in Formula One for kind of 3/4 of a season. Can I just tell listeners, especially those who are maybe fresh to Formula One in the last few years, we have 11 teams in Formula One in 2026, and people are celebrating the fact that there are so many teams. And Martin, when you were racing in Formula One in 1990, I counted up yesterday, there were 19 teams that were competing in Formula One that season. You scored 3 top 10 finishes. You would have been a point scorer under the current regulations. Of course, back then we only had points down to 6th place, but you had a couple of 8ths and a 7th. So you had top 10 finishes, and there was a formidable competition. And then you get to that Friday in Jerez, you go into qualifying. As you say, life couldn't get much better. You have those 4 contracts on the table. You and I have talked about the accident before. Maybe just for the benefit of the listeners, you can explain it in your own way. I mean, obviously you know what happened, but actually your memory of the detail of that accident is something only you are aware of.
Yeah, it was back-to-back Grand Prix. The weekend before was the Portuguese Grand Prix. There was much sense in flying back to the UK on the Sunday night or Monday morning and then flying back out again on the Wednesday night, Thursday. So we went with my friends Ed and Jane Devlin, and we stayed on the east coast of Spain, a place called Harvia. And we spent most of the time on the beach and getting sunburned as you do, because us Irish boys are very pale. We don't get much sunshine. So my guy called Joseph in Jerez, so I had to say to my sunburn with some fluids and chemicals and whatnot. And then the 4 of us went round on scooters, coming at 2 scooters, Vespa scooters, and Ed and Jenny on one scooter, me and Diane on the other. And I was pointing out which corners were quick and where was the best place to watch. We were going through there at 170, 180 miles an hour. And that's where Ed and Jenny were when actually I went off in front of them into this barrier. Roberto Moreno was with them then because he used to feed and look after Roberto when he drove for Van Diemen at Snetterton. And Ed's trying to get over this fence. And Roberto's pulling him down and said, no. He's like, leave him alone. He's dead. He's gone. Leave him alone.
So Roberto really thought you'd gone.
Yeah, I thought, and then he thought I was dead. And then another guy pulled up to protect my body was a guy called Pierre Luigi Martini in a minority car. He stopped the car because I was lying bare in the circuit. The circuit was still semi-live for qualifying. That's why there's no TV coverage on my accident, because Senna was on a Q lap and all the cameras were placed on him. So That's when they cut to where the car just hit the barrier and I was then down on the track. And that was a moment of time, Mark, that, took away everything. It's like a light switch. You work, you sacrifice your education, you work your way to the top to get into F1, which in itself is an achievement. But so many drivers trying to vie for so few seats, and for that to happen through no fault of my own, suspension collapsed. The front left damper, so there's like a bobsleigh. There's about I think 7 mil ride height. So once the top hit the tarmac, because the suspension is broke, you've got no steering control, and you're heading towards this barrier at 175 miles an hour, and all you can do is brace yourself for what's going to be one hell of a ride,
And as you pointed out, you were in a monocoque that was actually too small
Yes.
for you. So you didn't have any room to kind of, well, do anything. You didn't have any, first of all, you didn't have anything like the modern crash structures, which of course everyone takes for granted.
The tub was the same tub from the year before, which I ran a Judd V8. When they then got the Lamborghini, it was X number of kilos heavier, something like 12 kilos. So Frank had to find somewhere in the car to get that weight back again. And what did he do? Took her to the tub. So the tub was like a crisp paper packer, It broke several times during the course of that year. So when I hit the barrier, and it seems ironic, but thank God Frank did take the weight of the tub, because when I hit that barrier, I carried going forward with the inertia. I didn't stop dead like Senna and Ratzenberger and break my neck, right? I went with that. And if the tub had held up, I would most certain 110% definitely be dead, because I would have broken my neck.
That's really interesting.
It's ironic, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
the accident, the way it happened, actually did save my life, because I carried on. Little do people know that I broke virtually every bone in the body. The left femur came out to the side of the leg. The left leg's now 1.5 inches shorter than the right leg. But Sid Watkins knew that bones will heal, and I still have a broken collarbone here that they never repaired. But the big picture at the time was my internal organs, with the shock all carried going forward. And that's the thing that frightened Sid. He knew that my internal organs were going to shock. So he knew that he only had X number of hours to get me out of Seville, where the hospital was, and get me to his hospital in Whitechapel in London. And I flew in on the Tuesday. I flew into Gatwick by air ambulance. They transferred me in a helicopter straight onto the roof, down into the emergency rooms, and the very next day, as he said would happen, my body closed down. So I wasn't breathing. So I was put into a respirator for 7 weeks. I had kidney dialysis every day for 3 hours by machine. And my mother was there, and Sid Walken said to her, Margaret, she says, if you believe in God, he said, pray to your God, because we don't expect Martin to survive. She then got the chaplain, came and gave me the last rites. And for somehow, somewhere, I pulled through it. I had twice the jump leads on the operating table. My heart stopped twice. So technically, I died 3 times. And here I am. For all those people that prayed for me to live, it's your fault, because here I am. Some people may regret praying for me,
So you were unconscious, obviously, on the track, and Sid Watkins, Professor Sid Watkins, who was the chief medical delegate in Formula One, attended to you, albeit quite a few minutes after the accident occurred. The response time to your accident is one of the big learnings. I know that came out of your accident. But what was your first memory then after Jerez? I mean, do you have a recollection of coming around gradually in hospital, or did you wake up 2 months later? When did, if you like, the next chapter open for you?
Well, when I came out of my unconscious state, a batch of junior doctors under Sid's watch came around every day, and they were doing various tests. And this guy, and I was looking, my eyes were sunk into my skull, and I was watching everybody, but wasn't speaking. And there was people were a bit nervous because of the lack of oxygen to the brain back then, that maybe I may have had a bit of brain damage, not as yet to be confirmed. But this doctor dabbed me with a syringe, and it hurt. I said, "That effing hurts," right?
Yeah.
And that gave great joy to Sid Watkins, because the last Grand Prix, which is the Australian Grand Prix, at the driver's briefing, he said to the drivers there, and I know it was the team managers, "You'll be glad to know that your fellow colleague, Mr. Donnelly, said his first few words." And he said, "Told one of my doctors to F off." They went, "Yay!" First visual memory. This is a family show, isn't it? But it was one of the nurses wearing a tunic in the ward with sunlight through it, and she's wearing the nice suspenders. Was the first thing I remember. Sorry you asked that now, aren't
That I'm delighted to ask. I think that's the best answer we could have wished for. That proved you were well and truly alive, and everything was back to normal again.
Especially people that were coming to see me, my mother and father and my fiance were there every day, and that was that. So that was the first minute. But after that, Mark, you can't cheat time.
What stage did you realize this was game over and that life was now going to take a permanently new direction?
I did physiotherapy and hydrotherapy for a whole year in the North Norwich Hospital. I did 13 weeks over in Austria, the Dungal Scorsing camp. He was the guy that brought Lotta back after 6 weeks. We had his ferry accident in Germany, and then I had quadplasties done. Now, the problem I have is I burst a main artery up inside my groin, and when that happened, I was in fixators, pins in each side of the leg, trying to keep the bone straight for repair. And of course, I couldn't move the leg then, because move my leg within 2 or 3 minutes was absolute agony, because my left leg swelled up so much, the swelling crushed the nerves in my leg. And I had these quadplasties done, and what they do is, in layman's terms, they go in like salami ham and they slice that off the bone to get it free from the bugs that the muscle was stuck to the bone. When you bend your knee, that muscle will slide up and down on your femur. Now that muscle gets stuck to the femur, a bit like glue from the blood and stuff. And the first time you go up to 60 degrees of bend, and the second time you go up to 120 degrees of bend. But while they did that, they actually tore my skin across the top of my kneecap. And this guy called Brian Roper worked in the Chelsea Westminster Hospital. Came in and said to me, "Martin," "I've got some bad news for you." He said, "We got more flexibility out of your knee," but he said, "I look after the Chelsea Football Club with their knees and ankle injuries, and I'm telling you now," he said, "in my professional opinion, you'll never drive an F1 car again in your life." And that's the only time, after all the operations, the pain and the fentanyl and drips in there, that's the only time I broke down and cried. And it was hard for me to accept what he was saying, because he doesn't. Grand Prix drivers are a different breed of human beings. The determination and the willpower that we encountered in our upbringing is a marvel, because I read what he was saying was, you know your books, you've done your degrees, you've done all your courses, you know everything from your books, but you don't know the human spirit of a racing driver or that of Martin Donnelly. So I went back to Dungles again and carried on there, push, push, push. And I phoned Eddie Jordan, because Eddie, when he came to see me in the hospital, said to me, "Marty," he says, "if you ever want to drive my Grand Prix car, I'll always make it available for you." So I made that phone call, and fair play to DJ. Said, "Okay, Marty, fine, we'll do that for you. But, we got to find the time in the schedule where that allows for us to give up a week, basically giving the car to you to go testing." And that happened on February 1993. My fiance, my wife, then I think it was Diane, was 6 months pregnant, and we went back to Silverstone. I did a seat fit, and of course EJ turned that into the EJ PR day, because I think all the European journalists and TV crews were there. My biggest fear that day wasn't of driving the car, because I had no feeling in my left leg. I can't feel the release on the clutch, and the clutch was like a light bulb, either on or off. So I got mechanics to stand behind the car to push me along in neutral. Thankfully, I didn't stall a car. I went round. It was a foggy, misty morning. I drove the car flat chat down the Stowe Straight, down the Hanger Straight, Pitt Straight, with no fear. My only fear was then I couldn't see the corners because they're going so quick. It came up quickly, and then I got the call over the radio to come in and park the car. And that was my way of saying to Brian Roper, I proved you wrong. I'm in an F1 car. I'm here. And you know your medicine, but you don't know the spirit of an F1 driver.
Now we're going to go fast. We're going to go very, very fast forward here because you then rebuilt your life, rebuilt your health, competed in racing in lower formula in national racing. You have had quite an astonishing return to motorsport also as a steward. You've been an FIA steward in Formula One for, I think you told me, 5 years you did with the FIA, and also as a steward at Goodwood. But then we come to F1 the movie, and here we are 30 years and more after your career came to an end in Formula One, and you get an unexpected phone call. Tell us about that and the backstory to what then happened with your involvement in F1 the movie.
Typical Saturday night, sat in, cheese and biscuits, glass of wine, watched whatever was on TV then, and the mobile phone rang, and it said withheld number in there. I said, he says, that Martin? Yes, it is Martin. I said, I don't want any windows or doors or anything else. I think it was one of those cold calls that you get. And I go, who's this? And eventually he said, it's Lewis. I said, Lewis who? He says, Lewis Hamilton. And I had to eat the biggest slice of humble pie. I said, I'm absolutely sorry, Lewis. I said, it's not often. I said, my mobile phone takes calls from a 7-time world champion. Humble apologies. And we got things calmed down a bit, and we got chatting. He's over in Baku at the Grand Prix. Obviously, this Grand Prix was taking place with Joe Kowinski. And he said, Martin, he said, we'd like to use your piece of your Grand Prix accent in the film. And I says, do you have any problems with us doing that? And I'm thinking, well, if I say yes, they're going to use that, but what do I get back in return? And I said, Lewis, it's an honor and a privilege to be asked by yourself. But I said, like an old driver, they'll say, well, what's in it for me? And he said, obviously, Mark, we expect you want some form of remuneration. And I said, yes, very much so. And so he said, what I'll do is I'll get my people to call your people, and we'll eventually get the decimal point in the right place. And that's exactly what happened. A week after that, I was up in Silverstone in a trailer with Joe Kowalski and Brad Pitt, outlining the details of a contract and what they expected from me.
What a bizarre twist of fate that brings that all around. And of course, you then not only gave them permission, but you actually then helped to oversee what became the staging of your accident. Is the backstory to the Sonny Hayes character?
Very much so, yes. Yeah.
Not just then advising on the movie, and as I said, they used your accident as the backstory to the Sonny Hayes character, but you then ended up with Brad at the premiere in London. And you talked earlier on about pinch yourself moments, such as when you started driving in Formula One for Team Lotus. But being at that London premiere with Brad was another pinch yourself moment in your life. And here we are, 35 years later, with you involved in the biggest grossing movie of Brad Pitt's career. It's taken nearly $650 million at the box office, and he's at the London premiere and paying tribute to you for your fortitude and your story, which I think he found quite inspirational.
Very much so. I mean, I was lucky to get 4 tickets for the premiere. I mean, 2 rows behind me was Tom Cruise, and 2 rows in front of me was Ed Sheeran. He's just said, they want to thank me personally, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. And my kids shortened on with me, and they said, Dad, he's mentioned your name. And I went, don't worry. I said, that's just Brad being Brad, There was 2 seats on the aisle were left empty. And the film starts, and I'm watching, quite tuned into that. And then about a third of the way into the movie, these 2 people come up the side and sat beside, and it was Brad and his girlfriend. and shook on our hands. And he said, I want to meet you guys at the after party. And, when you got the after party and we're talking to Brad and chatting away to him as I am to you now, he wasn't a rush off to go anywhere else. Those sort of experiences, to be able to have my kids experience to talk to Brad Pitt and pursue an A-list Hollywood star, those things don't happen from guys from West Belfast, And that was a very, very special and proud moment for me. And that happened because of my accident 35 years ago.
Well, 35 years to become an overnight sensation in Hollywood, Martin Donnelly. It's been a great pleasure talking to you on the Business of Winning podcast. I know you have lots of plans for the future. We know Apple are looking at potentially a sequel to F1 the movie. Well done on what you achieved this year with working on that program and meeting Brad, and really great to have had this conversation with you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Mark. Thank you.
Well, it was really great to have this opportunity to chat to Martin Donnelly. It's only when you hear the story of his accident from his perspective that you come to realise just what a sliding doors moment that was for him. I recall visiting him in hospital in Seville on the day of the accident, then later at the Royal London Hospital. I used to go every week or 10 days to visit him, and I remember Professor Sid Watkins telling me just how seriously ill Martin was. Then spent a few days with him at Willy Dungle's clinic in Austria. As Martin said, Willy Dungle being perhaps most famous for helping Niki Lauda recover from that horrific accident and the burn injuries he received at the Nürburgring back in the 1970s. Martin's recovery, has been nothing short of astonishing. And although he naturally, I think, wishes that he had not suffered that accident, there's no doubt that his positivity, his resilience, and his love of life has continued to really shine through. He's really such a positive guy to spend time with. Now, we're going to be back with you next year, but in the meantime, we'd like to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and wish you a healthy and prosperous 2026. Today's podcast was brought to you by Performance Insights, specialists in bringing expert speakers and content from Formula One to corporate events worldwide. To find out more, visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk or follow us at Performance Insights on LinkedIn or Instagram.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about Performance Insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.